The town called her a ghost. The night watchman let her in, and the truth changed everything. The rumor had been running through Asheville for the better part of a month. Someone had seen a shape on the mill road, tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the morning mist before the first farmers were out. A woman, maybe, or something shaped like one, but far too large and far too quiet, slipping through the fog as if it owned the road and had no use for daylight. By the time the story reached the tavern, it had grown. The shape had glowing eyes. It left no footprints. It had been spotted twice in the same week near the old stone bridge where the mill wheel no longer turned. By the end of the second week, half the village was convinced the old Asheville mill was haunted, and the other half was convinced that whatever haunted it had moved into the road itself. Corwin Marsh heard the story on a Tuesday, standing at the back of the tavern with a cup of cider he had not yet touched. He was a lean, gray-templed man of 53, not tall but steady, with hands scarred from a decade of work and eyes that had learned to stay calm in the dark. He had been the night watchman at Asheville's East Gate for 11 years. He knew the mill road better than anyone alive. He walked it twice a night, once at midnight, once before dawn, and he had never seen a ghost. He put his cider down and went back to work. By the end of the third week, the mood had shifted from curiosity to something harder. A farmer named Gort had seen the shape again, close enough this time to make out the color of its skin. Green, he said, dark green like river moss, and the curve of tusks at the corners of its mouth. That word changed everything. It was not a ghost. It was an orc. And in Asheville, which had not seen an orc in living memory, that word carried a weight that no amount of calm reason could easily lift. By the following Saturday, Gort had organized a group of 11 men with torches and 2 hunting dogs, and they were going to follow the mill road at dusk and find whatever was living in the old millworks. Corwin heard about it that afternoon. He finished his supper, pulled on his long coat, lit his lantern, and walked to the east gate an hour earlier than usual. The mill road ran east from the gate along the bottom of the valley, following the old mill race for half a mile before it turned up toward the hills. It was a straight road, paved with flat stones from the river, and in autumn the ash trees on either side dropped their leaves so thick that the road was carpeted yellow and brown all the way to the bridge. Corwin walked it slowly, lantern held at his hip, and he listened. He heard the dogs before he heard the men, a baying sound, high and urgent, coming from somewhere beyond the bridge. Then he heard the torches, which was not a sound exactly but a quality of light, a warm flicker catching the underside of the ash leaves a quarter-mile ahead. Then he heard boots on the stone, a lot of them, and the low, purposeful sound of men moving together in the way that men move when they have decided something. Corwin stopped walking and held the lantern up. She came around the curve of the road at a dead run. He saw her clearly in the lantern light, a tall orc woman, green-skinned and broad across the shoulders, her dark hair loose and tangled, wearing a long travel coat that had seen hard use and boots that were coming apart at the heel. She was not floating. She left footprints in the leaf-carpeted road. She was breathing hard, and one hand was pressed against her ribs, and she was running with the uneven, grinding gait of someone who was hurt and running anyway, because stopping was not an option she had. She saw Corwin at the same moment he saw her, and she pulled up short, 3 feet between them, the lantern's light full on her face. She was not young. She had the weathered, deep-carved look of someone who had been through decades of hard weather, and her eyes, dark green, steady, nothing like glowing, were not afraid of him. They were calculating him, deciding in the space of a single breath whether he was a danger or an obstacle or something else entirely. He had the impression, sharp and sudden, that this was a person who had been making that calculation her whole life, reading a room, reading a road, reading a stranger's face before he had time to decide what he was going to do, and that she was very good at it. Behind her, around the curve, the dog sounded closer. Corwin did not step back. He looked at the hand pressed against her ribs, at the dark stain spreading through the fingers of her coat, and he made up his mind. He stepped sideways off the road, onto the narrow shoulder between the road stones and the mill race, and he pointed at the ditch behind him, a low, grassy hollow where the old mill race had silted in and the reeds grew thick. "Get down," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Now," he said, still quiet. "Get down in the reeds and don't move." There was one long moment. He could hear the dogs clearly now, and the men's voices. And then she slid past him and dropped into the hollow without a word, and the reeds closed over her. Corwin stepped back onto the road, turned to face the bridge, and held his lantern up. Gort came around the curve first, torch high, 2 dogs on short leads straining forward. The other 10 men followed in a loose knot, and Corwin counted faces in the torchlight and recognized most of them. A tanner, a miller's assistant, a boy of perhaps 17 who had no business being there but clearly felt he did. Gort pulled the dogs up when he saw Corwin. "Marsh, you're early." "I'm doing my job," Corwin said. "What are you doing on my road at dusk with hunting dogs?" "We tracked it from the old mill house." Gort pointed past him. "It came this way. The dogs have the scent." "The dogs have a rabbit," Corwin said. He kept his voice flat and certain. "I've been on this road for an hour. There's nothing here." The dogs pulled at their leads. Gort watched them, then looked at Corwin. "We saw it at the mill." "You saw something. You've been seeing something for 3 weeks." Corwin lowered his lantern and looked at the group. "Go home. If there's anything real out here, I'll find it. That's what I'm paid for." Gort held his ground another moment. The dogs were still pulling toward the bridge, not toward the reeds, and after a long silence Gort let them pull, walking past Corwin and on down the road, the 11 men trailing. The boy at the back glanced sideways into the millrace reeds, and Corwin looked straight at him, until the boy looked away and kept walking. He waited until the last torch was past the bridge. Then he waited 5 minutes more. Then he turned toward the reeds. "They're gone," he said. Silence. Then the reeds moved and she came up out of the hollow, slower this time, one hand still on her ribs. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low, accented, with the rolling quality of someone whose first language shaped the words differently. "How bad is it?" he said, nodding at her side. She looked down at her hand against her ribs. "A fence post, 2 days ago. It is not deep, but it does not stop." Corwin picked up his lantern and pointed toward the gate. "Come on, then." She did not move immediately. She was looking at him with those steady, calculating eyes again, the same look she had given him on the road, and he understood it now. It was not suspicion, exactly. It was the careful look of someone who had learned not to take generosity at face value. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he said. "But you're hurt and you're alone, and they'll be back in the morning with more men. Come or don't. Your choice." Another long moment, then she followed him. The east gatehouse was a single stone room built into the base of the old wall, with a fire grate, a narrow cot, a table, and 3 shelves of supplies that Corwin had accumulated over 11 years of night watches, dried food, a lantern oil jug, a small kit of linen and salve and needle, and thread that he had put together after the 3rd time he'd had to patch a traveler's wound in the dark. He brought her inside, shut the door, and added wood to the fire grate without speaking. She stood near the door, looking at the room with the careful stillness of someone cataloging exits. "Sit down," he said. She sat on the edge of the cot slowly. In the firelight he could see her more clearly, the deep green of her skin, the 2 small tusks curving up from her lower jaw, the heavy silver braid clasps wound through her dark hair, 4 of them, larger than any he had seen on a traveler. The coat she wore was good wool beneath the travel stains, with orc embroidery along the collar, geometric, in rust and gold, the kind of work that took skill. Her boots were coming apart, but they had been good boots once, with double soles and careful stitching. He opened the wound kit and set it on the table without asking. "Take the coat off," he said, "or at least open it so I can see." She hesitated, then drew the coat open. The wound was along the left side, below the ribs, a long gouge from something blunt and splintered rather than a cut, already beginning to close at the edges but still weeping at the center, dark against her skin. "That should have been seen to 2 days ago," he said. "There was no one to see to it," she said. He cleaned it, which she bore without sound, and closed the worst of the center with 3 neat stitches that she also bore without sound, watching his hands with an expression that might have been professional respect. He put salve over it, wrapped it in clean linen, and tied it off. "Are you hungry?" he said. "Yes," she said after a moment, as if admitting it cost something. He put a pot on the grate. He had brought soup from the tavern earlier in the evening, thick and hot, and he had not eaten his share yet. He ladled 2 cups and set one on the table beside her and took the other for himself and sat on the stool by the fire. She looked at the cup for a moment, then she picked it up and drank. He did not ask her name that night. He watched the fire and she watched the door, and eventually she lay back on the cot with her coat over her, and he pulled his stool to the grate and dozed, as he often did, until the hour before dawn when he made his last round. When he came back from the round she was awake, sitting up, watching him come through the door. "They'll be back today," she said. "Probably," he said. "Then I should go." He considered it. "Where?" She looked at the wall. "I was going north," she said, "to Asheville." "You're in Asheville," he said. Something moved across her face, something that was not quite surprise and not quite something else. "The valley," she said. "This valley is the town." "Has been for 40 years," he said. "The old town moved down from the ridge when the mill was built. Why were you going to Asheville?" She was quiet for a long time, not evasive, thoughtful, in the way of someone deciding what to say and what to hold back and whether the balance was right. "I was sent to read the treaty stone," she said at last. "Our clan's treaty with this valley. We have a right to read it once a generation, to stand at the stone and say the words. I didn't know the town had moved." Corwin looked at her. "What clan?" She looked back at him steadily. "Clan Asheville," she said. He was quiet for a moment. He knew that name. Every child in Asheville knew that name, or used to. It was in the town's founding story, the one the elders told on founding day, the one carved on the cornerstone of the old meeting hall. Before the settlers had come to the valley, before the mill had been built, before the road had been laid, there had been an Orc clan in these hills. Not enemies, not in the old stories. The founders had come to an agreement with them. Land for passage, passage for peace. A treaty carved into a flat river stone that had stood at the valley's north end for as long as anyone could remember. The treaty stone. He had walked past it 100 times without thinking about what it meant. He looked at this woman, the silver braid clasps, the embroidered collar, the steady eyes that had been calculating since the moment she'd seen him, and something in him went very quiet. "You're the clan matriarch," he said. She did not answer immediately. Then she said, "I am the wandering matriarch, the one who walks the old roads. We send one out every 20 years to read the stones and walk the borders and remember what was agreed." She paused. "I have been walking for 3 months. This was the last stone." He turned back to the fire. He sat with that for a moment. "You've been living rough for 3 months," he said, "on the old clan roads." "Yes." "Because it's your job." "Yes." He nodded slowly. He thought about the village of Asheville and the story they had built about a ghost, and the 11 men with torches and dogs, and the boy at the back who had almost looked into the reeds. He thought about the founding story on the cornerstone of the meeting hall, and about how long it had been since anyone in Asheville had actually read it. "Stay," he said. She looked at him. "Stay until you're healed," he said. 2, 3 days. I'll bring you to the treaty stone when it's dark and there's no one on the road. You can say your words and do what you came to do." He paused. "And then if you want to stay a little longer before you go back north, you can do that too." The look she gave him then was different from any of the others. It was not calculation, and it was not suspicion. It was the look of someone who had been walking alone for 3 months on hard roads and had been chased through the dark by torches, and had been told, very simply, that they were welcome to rest. "My name is Mara Stonebraid," she said. "Corwin Marsh," he said. "Night Watchman, not much of a title." "It is a good title," she said, and there was something in her voice that might have been the beginning of warmth. "A night watchman is someone who stands between the dark and the people who sleep. That is worth something." He handed her a second cup of soup and went back to his stool. She stayed 3 days. The second day Gort came back with 15 men, as Corwin had predicted, and Corwin met them at the gate and told them the road was clear and had been clear all night, and he had walked it 4 times and found nothing. Gort looked at him for a long moment, long enough that Corwin wondered if the man was going to push, and then Gort turned his group around and went back to the village. Corwin went back to the gatehouse with a pot of stew and a loaf of bread and a change of linen for the wound, and Mara was sitting at the table with a small folded piece of material in her hands, working at it with a needle and thread from his kit. She did not put it away when he came in. It was a piece of orc embroidery, the same geometric style as her collar, rust and gold, and she was adding to it with steady, practiced hands. "How is it?" he said, nodding at her side. "Better," she said. "It will close properly now." He set the stew on the table and cut the bread. She put the embroidery down and they ate together, which was a different thing from the first night, less wary, more ordinary, the kind of meal shared by people who have decided, without saying so, that they trust each other enough to eat without watching the door. "Tell me about the clan," he said, when the bread was half gone. She looked at him. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you'd want someone to know," he said. "If someone who'd never met your people was going to tell the story." She thought about it. She ate a few bites of stew. Then she said, "We are a mountain clan. We have been in these hills since before the hills had names that humans gave them. We are not many, perhaps 400, including the children. We herd and we farm in the way of mountain people, and we know the old roads because we built most of them." "The road I walk," he said. "Yes," a faint acknowledgement in her voice. "The mill road follows the old drove road. Our people brought cattle through that valley for 200 years before the mill was built." She paused. "We do not mind the mill. We do not mind the town. The agreement was good. The first settlers were fair people." "They seem to have forgotten," Corwin said. "People forget," she said without bitterness. "It happens. That is why we send the wandering matriarch, so at least one person remembers." He asked her about the treaty stone and she described it, a flat slab of gray river granite about waist-high, set upright in the ground at the north end of the valley, with the agreement carved in both languages, the orc runes on one face and the human script on the other. He knew exactly where it was. He had sat on it once, eating a midday meal during a surveying job, years before he had become the night watchman. He had not known what it was. He had thought it was a boundary marker. "Tomorrow night," he said, "I'll take you there." She nodded. The second day he brought her a proper book, a geography of the eastern valleys that had been sitting on the gatehouse shelf since a former watchman had left it, decades ago. She looked at it with surprise, and then opened it and read without speaking for the better part of an hour while he did the small maintenance work of the gate, oiling the hinges, checking the latch, mending a section of the wooden fence rail that had begun to split. When he came back inside, she was still reading, and she had turned to a map of the northern hill roads with the careful attention of someone checking it against their own knowledge. "This is wrong," she said, pointing to a line on the map. He came and looked. "Which road is that?" "The Upper Drove Road, the one that cuts through the Redville Pass." "This map shows it going west of the Pine Stand." "It doesn't. It has gone east of the Pine Stand for 60 years since the western branch washed out in the flood." She traced the correct line with one finger just above the paper. "We rerouted it. Our clan did. The map was never corrected." He looked at her tracing finger and at the map. "You know these roads." "I have walked them," she said. "My mother walked them before me, her mother before her." She closed the book and set it on the table. "The wandering matriarch is also the road keeper. We are the ones who remember which way the paths actually go." He thought about that. "That's a useful thing," he said. "It has been once or twice," she said, and there was the dry, quiet humor in it that he had begun to recognize as her characteristic register. Not ironic, not bitter, but honest in the way of someone who has seen a great deal of the world from a road-level view. On the third morning she was sitting outside the gatehouse when he came back from his dawn round, not hiding exactly, but tucked into the angle of the wall where the shadow was deepest, watching the road with the alert, quiet stillness of someone who spent a great deal of time outdoors. The sun was just coming up over the ridge, and the ash trees were burning gold in it, and the mill road was empty and beautiful, and nothing like the haunted thing the village had made of it. "It's early," he said. "Come in and eat." "I like mornings," she said. He looked at her, the long orc face with its quiet authority, the silver clasps bright in the new light, the way she sat completely still without looking rigid, and something occurred to him that had not occurred before. "How long has it been since you had a morning that was not a night on someone's road?" he said. She considered this. 3 months, she said. "Stay for breakfast," he said. "A real one." "I have eggs." She came inside, and he made eggs and the last of the bread, and they ate at the table in the morning light coming through the small gatehouse window, and she told him about the northern mountains and the Orc Spring Festival, where the whole clan came down to the lower meadows, and the children flew kites that the older women had made from reed and colored paper, and the kite festival was the one day of the year when the wandering matriarch came home. "Your family is waiting," he said. "My daughter is waiting," she said. "She takes care of the clan while I walk." A pause. "She worries too much." He smiled. "Daughters do." "Do you have one?" "No," he said. "A son. He's a farmer outside Redvale. Doesn't worry about me at all, which I suppose is worse." She laughed at that, a short, warm sound surprised out of her, and she covered it with her hand as if laughter was something she didn't quite expect from herself. "That is also true," she said. They sat for a while longer in the comfortable way of people who have found, unexpectedly, that they are good company for each other. Outside, Asheville was waking up, the first carts on the main road, the smell of bakery smoke, and the mill road lay quiet and golden and not haunted by anything except the past. That night, well after midnight, Corwin took her to the Treaty Stone. He knew how to move through Asheville in the dark without being seen. 11 years of night rounds had made him intimate with the town's rhythms, its sleeping shapes, the way the watch changed, and the spots where a person could cross from the main road to the north track without passing a window. He took Mara through the tanner's yard and across the mill race bridge and up the north track without seeing another soul, and the night was cold and clear, the stars very bright over the valley, the ash trees along the track holding their last leaves like gold coins in the dark. The Treaty Stone was where he remembered it, at the edge of a small clearing where the track widened before it curved up into the hills. It was taller than he recalled, or perhaps he had simply not paid attention before. It came to just above his shoulder, flat-faced and gray, and in the lantern light he could see the carvings on both faces, the human script on the south face, the orc runes on the north. He held the lantern so the light caught the runes and stepped back. Mara moved to the stone without hesitation. She put both hands on the north face, flat against the carved runes, and she stood there for a long moment with her eyes closed. Then she spoke, not loudly, not a shout or a proclamation, but in a low, rolling voice that had the cadence of something memorized over many generations, the words in the orc language, carrying the heavy consonants and the long vowels that he did not understand but that had a weight to them, the weight of something that had been said in this spot before and would be said again. She spoke for perhaps 5 minutes. He held the lantern and did not move. When she finished, she opened her eyes and her hands came off the stone slowly, as if she were reluctant to lose the contact. She turned to face him. "It is done," she said. "What does it say?" he asked. The orc sighed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It says, the valley of the Ash River belongs to all who tend it with care. The clan Asheville holds the hills and the high meadows. The new settlers hold the valley floor. Neither drives out the other, neither takes the other's children. The river is shared. The roads are shared. Whoever honors this stone honors the living." He read the human side in the lantern light. It said the same things in different words, ending with, "And we set our names to this agreement as free people, in the sight of the hills we both call home." He read it twice. 40 years, he said. 40 years, she agreed. "No one reads this anymore." "You read it now," she said. He looked at her. In the lantern light, at the treaty stone, with the autumn stars overhead and the hills quiet on all sides, there was something in this moment that felt larger than a night watchman and a tired traveler who had given each other soup and a bandage and an hour of honest conversation. It felt like something that had been waiting to be restored. He blew out a long breath. "When you go back north," he said, "what do you tell the clan?" "What I found," she said. "What the stone said. Whether the agreement is still honored. Whether the roads are passable and the river clear. Whether the valley is a place our people can still pass through without harm, or whether things have changed in the 20 years since the last wandering matriarch came through. I walk and I watch and I carry back what I found. That is the whole of the job." "And is it," he said, "honored?" She considered this carefully, the way she considered everything thoroughly, without hurry. "The road is shared," she said. "The river is shared. No one drove me out, no one knew I was here, and ignorance is not the same as malice." A pause. "One man honored the stone before he knew what it was. That is not a small thing either." She looked at him. "I think the agreement is still alive. I will tell the clan so." He didn't say anything to that. He simply stood beside the treaty stone with his lantern and let the night be quiet around them. She put her hand on the stone one more time, briefly, and then she turned and they walked back through the dark valley together. They did not talk much on the way back. They did not need to. The night was clear and cold, and the ash trees were bone white in the lantern glow, and the treaty stone stood behind them in the clearing doing its patient work. And Corwin thought that if he had been asked 2 weeks ago whether a ghost on the mill road would change his life, he would have said no. She left on the 4th morning. She left before the village was up, in the gray hour before the sun cleared the ridge, with her coat mended at the collar where the stitching had come loose, her wound bound in clean linen, and 3 days of soup and bread behind her. He had packed her a small canvas sack the night before, dried meat from his own shelf, a half loaf, a square of hard cheese, a small bottle of the tallow salve for the wound, and set it by the door without comment. She had looked at it in the morning and then at him, and she had not said anything about it, which was the kind of not saying that holds more than words. She stood in the gatehouse doorway and looked at Corwin, and he stood by the fire grate and looked at her. And it was the kind of leave-taking where both people know that the words available are smaller than the thing that happened. "Thank you," she said. "Come back when you pass through," he said. "Wandering matriarchs don't pass the same stone twice," she said. "I know," he said. "Come back anyway." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but a near neighbor of it. She reached into her coat and brought out the piece of embroidery she had been working on at the table, the rust and gold geometric pattern on a small square of dark wool. She set it on the table. "Clan Asheville colors," she said. "A friend of the clan carries it." He looked at the embroidery, at the small careful stitches, and the colors that were old and true and clearly meant something. "I'll carry it," he said. She nodded once. Then she went out the door and down the mill road and into the ash tree morning, and he watched her go until the road curved and there was nothing left to watch. He picked up the embroidery and put it in his coat pocket. Then he picked up his lantern and went out on his last round of the day, the road golden and quiet and familiar under his feet, and the treaty stone somewhere up at the north end of the valley doing its patient work, and Asheville waking up around him in the ordinary way. The first rider came on the 6th morning. Corwin was at the gate when he heard the hoofbeats, not fast, not urgent, but deliberate and measured, the sound of a large horse being ridden with care and purpose. He turned to face the north track, lantern still in his hand from the dawn round, and the rider came around the bend from the direction of the treaty stone. He was an orc, tall even in the saddle, wearing a travel cloak in the same rust and gold as the embroidery in Corwin's pocket, with a heavy silver braid clasp at his collar that matched the ones in Mara Stonebraid's hair. He pulled the horse up at the gate and looked down at Corwin with the same steady, measuring quality that Corwin had learned to recognize. "You are the night watchman," the rider said, not a question. "I am," Corwin said. "Mara Stonebraid sent word," the rider said. "We come to say thank you." Corwin looked past the rider, up the north track, and he saw what was behind him. They were coming down through the ash trees in a long file, orc riders, most of them, along with orc men and women on foot, walking with the ease of people who had traveled long distances and expected to travel farther. He counted quickly, 30, 40, 50, and more behind them, moving through the morning light in the rust and gold colors of Clan Asheville, with the heavy silver braid clasps glinting in the early sun. Children were among them, walking close to the adults, wide-eyed and curious and not afraid. There were 63 of them in the end. He counted twice. They stopped in the wide yard inside the east gate, the yard that served as the gathering place for market days and fair days and the occasional town meeting, and they arranged themselves in that yard with a quiet, practiced order that suggested they knew how to occupy a space without crowding it. The rider dismounted and stood at Corwin's side, and an older orc woman, not Mara, but with her mother's eyes and her mother's steady bearing, came forward from the group and stopped before him. "I am Dara Stonebraid," she said. "Mara's daughter. I keep the clan while she walks." She paused. "She told me what you did." "I gave her soup and a bandage," Corwin said. "It wasn't much." Dara looked at him for a long moment with something that might have been patience and might have been appraisal. "She was 3 months on the road," Dara said. 3 months alone on the old drove roads with a fence post wound and 11 men with torches on her trail. She had 1 day left to the treaty stone and she was being hunted." She paused. "You stood in front of the torches. You gave her your fire and your food and your roof and 3 days of safety. You took her to the stone in the dark so she could say the words. You did not ask who she was or what she was worth or whether it was worth the trouble. You simply opened the door." She paused again. "That is not a small thing." Corwin looked at the 63 people in his gate yard, in the morning light, in their clan colors. "She's all right," he said. "She got home safe." "She got home safe," Dara said. "She sent us ahead of her. She is still walking. She has 2 more days north. But she sent word as soon as she reached the high road and we came." "You came a long way," he said. "The treaty says the road is shared," Dara said. "We have not walked this road in a very long time. It seemed right to walk it now." Behind her, the clan was settling into the gate yard with that quiet, orderly ease, some sitting on the low wall, some spreading cloth on the ground, and several who were clearly organizers beginning to bring things out of the packs the horses carried. Corwin watched, a little stunned, as a cooking fire was requested of him by a polite young woman with silver braid clasps, and then built in the fire ring that had stood in the gate yard for 30 years and not been used in at least 10. "What's in the packs?" he said. "Winter goods," Dara said. "Wool and salted meat and dried fruit and a cask of mountain ale, what we bring when we visit." A brief pause. The clan wanted to bring more, but it is a 3-day journey and there are limits to what horses carry. It's already too much, he said. It is not enough, she said simply. He stood in the gate yard with 63 orc people of Clan Asheville, moving quietly around him, and the cooking fire starting up, and the smell of real food in the morning air. And he thought about Mara Stonebraid on the mill road in the dark, and the way she had looked at him when he had pointed at the reeds and said get down and meant it, and the way she had said you are welcome to stay, as long as you need, as if she understood exactly how rare that sentence was. He thought about the treaty stone at the north end of the valley, standing in the dark with 40 years of neglect on it and both languages still legible, waiting. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the embroidery and left it there. Do you want to see the stone? He said. While you're here. Dara looked at him steadily. Yes, she said, we would like that very much. He took them to the stone that morning, all 63 of them. A long procession up the north track in the autumn light, the Orc clan and the night watchman, with the ash trees dropping their last leaves overhead and the valley quiet and the sky a pale clear blue. Asheville woke up and came out of doors. There was no way around it. 63 orc people walking through a town of 400 humans was not something that could be quiet or unnoticed, and Corwin did not try to make it so. He walked at the head of the procession with Dara Stonebraid at his side, and when he passed the tavern where Gort was standing with a cup of morning ale and an expression that had gone somewhere between alarmed and baffled, Corwin nodded to him and kept walking. He looked straight ahead. The procession moved up the main road and onto the north track and came to the treaty stone in the clearing, and there Dara Stonebraid stopped and turned to face her people, and she spoke in the orc language for a long time. Corwin could not follow the words, but he recognized their weight, the same weight as Mara's words in the dark. And when she finished, the clan was quiet for a long moment, and then together they began to read the stone. Not all at once, in turns, one by one, men and women and the older children, each coming forward and placing both hands on the north face and speaking the words quietly, the way Mara had spoken them, the way this had been done before and would be done again. Corwin stood to one side and held his lantern, though it was full morning now and the light was not needed, because some habits are worth keeping. Gort arrived halfway through, out of breath, and stopped at the edge of the clearing with 6 other townspeople behind him. He looked at the stone, at the orc clan reading it in turn, at Corwin standing at the side with his lantern. His face went through several expressions. Corwin walked over to him. This is their treaty stone, Corwin said quietly. It's been here since before the town was built. Clan Asheville agreed with the founders that the valley floor and the hills would be shared, that the roads and the river would be shared, that neither drove out the other. He looked at Gort. It's on the cornerstone of the meeting hall in the founding story. You learned it in school. Gort looked at the stone, at the orc runes and the human script, at the date 40 years ago, the year the mill had been built, the year of the founding. The ghost, Gort said. The wandering matriarch, Corwin said. She comes every 20 years to read the stone. She has as much right to this road as we do. He paused. She had a fence post wound and 3 months of hard roads and your dogs on her trail. I let her rest in the gatehouse. Gort was quiet for a long time. He looked at the clan gathered around the stone, the rust and gold colors, the silver braid clasps. He looked at the children among them, 3 small ones, standing close to an older woman, watching the proceedings with solemn interest. He looked at the text on the human face of the stone, and Corwin could see him reading it slowly, the way you read something you know you should have read long ago. The words on the stone were plain and unhurried. They did not accuse anyone of anything. They stated what had been agreed, and why, and by whom, and they ended. We set our names to this agreement as free people, in the sight of the hills we both call home. The names beneath, 6 human, 6 orc, were worn shallow by the years but still legible if you looked closely, carved with the care of people who had understood that the stone would outlast them, and who wanted it to be read. Gort put one hand out and touched the stone, not reading it again, just touching it the way a person touches something they have been walking past without seeing for a long time and have only now actually noticed. "They brought winter goods," Corwin said. "Wool and salted meat and mountain ale. It's in the gate yard." He paused. "I'm going to invite them to stay for the day. Use the market square." Gort looked at him. Something was moving in the man's face, not hostility, not the torch and dog's energy of a week ago, but something more uncertain and more honest. Something that recognized, slowly, the distance between what he had believed and what was standing in this clearing. "The dogs tracked her to the mill house," Gort said. "She was sheltering from the rain," Corwin said. Gort turned that over, looked at the stone again, looked at the orc family nearest to him, a man and woman his own age, with a young one between them, all three with their hands on the stone and their eyes closed, and their faces carrying the quiet, private weight of something done in honor of those who came before. "All right," Gort said at last, "Market Square." They stayed the day. The market square of Asheville filled up with Clan Asheville in a way that the square had not filled in years. The cooking fire going properly now. The clan bringing out the winter goods that turned out to include, in addition to the wool and the meat and the dried fruit and the mountain ale, several bolts of the rust-end gold embroidered cloth, a half-dozen carved wooden objects of evident craft and quality, and a great deal of the easy, unhurried conversation that people produce when they have crossed a long distance, specifically to talk to someone. An orc elder near the cooking fire turned out to know more about curing smoked meat than anyone in Asheville had ever encountered, and by mid-morning there were 4 farmers crouched around him while he described, in accented but careful human speech, the method his family had used for 3 generations in the mountain cold. He spoke slowly, and they listened closely, and someone went and got a scrap of paper and a charcoal stick, and by the time the lesson was over there was a small crowd and 3 pages of notes. Children were involved, inevitably. The orc children were curious, and the human children were curious, and within an hour of the clan settling into the square, there was a game involving a leather ball and no rules that Corwin could identify, played by a mixed group of 10 that had arrived at the arrangement through some process of mutual comprehension that needed no adult intervention. An orc girl of perhaps 10, with tiny silver clips in her braids and a gap-toothed grin, was apparently the fastest runner in the square, and she was broadcasting this fact with cheerful impartiality to everyone who came near. The baker came out. The cobbler came out. The miller's wife came and stood near the embroidered cloth with an expression that moved from wariness to professional interest to something resembling actual want. The tanner came and talked to one of the orc men about hides for half an hour, and Corwin watched them gesturing over a piece of leather with the specific absorbed focus of 2 people who have found a common language. He did not follow the specifics, but he recognized the posture, the leaning in, the careful examining, the small respectful nod that means I had not thought of doing it that way. Gort stayed all day. He did not say much, but toward late afternoon Corwin saw him standing near the treaty stones rubbing that one of the orc women had made on paper, a full impression of the human text, clear and dark, and reading it again, the full thing beginning to end, with the kind of attention you give to something you intend to remember. Dara Stonebraid found Corwin in the early afternoon, sitting on the low wall at the edge of the square watching the leather ball game. "This is better than I expected," she said. "It's better than I expected," he agreed. "Mara said you were a quiet man who didn't ask unnecessary questions." She paused. "She did not say you were also a stubborn one." "I didn't argue with anyone," he said. "I just kept walking." "That is exactly what stubborn looks like," she said. He smiled. "When she comes next time," he said, "she doesn't have to sleep in the ditch." "No," Dara agreed. "She doesn't. She looked out at the square, the cooking fire, the game, the two men talking about hides, the mill wife examining the cloth. 20 years is a long time to wait. She said the same stone isn't read twice, he said. By the wandering matriarch, Dara said. The rest of the clan is not under that rule. She looked at him. If the treaty holds, we come back. He looked at the square. At Asheville on a Tuesday in October, more alive than it had been in months, the smell of mountain ale and wood smoke and real bread all at once, and the leather ball rolling past his feet, kicked by a small foot he could not immediately identify as belonging to a human or an orc child. The treaty holds, he said. They left at dusk, the long file of Clan Asheville going back up the north track in the last of the light, the horses loaded lighter than they had come, the rust and gold colors moving through the ash trees until the dark folded around them. Corwin stood at the gate and watched them go. When the last rider disappeared around the bend, he turned back to the gate yard and found that it was not entirely empty. Someone had left a bundle on the low wall, wool, and a small cask of the mountain ale, and a folded piece of embroidered cloth, larger than the one Mara had left him, with a note in careful human script in a hand that had learned the letters as a second language. For the night watchman who remembered the stone. Clan Asheville. He picked up the bundle and the cask and carried them inside. He sat at the table in the gatehouse in the firelight and poured a cup of the mountain ale. It was dark and rich, and tasted of pine and something smoky he couldn't name, and he unfolded the embroidered cloth and laid it flat on the table. It was large enough for a wall or a door. A proper piece, with the geometric borders and the clan colors worked in full, and in the center something he had not expected. A tree, rendered in the orc geometric style, with roots going down and branches going up, and at the base of the tree the flat outline of a stone. The treaty stone, in Clan Asheville colors on Corwin's wall in the gatehouse at the east end of the mill road. He sat with it for a long time. Then he took a nail from the shelf and hung it on the wall beside the fire grate, where he would see it every night, and poured another cup of mountain ale and went out to walk his road. The mill road was quiet and golden in the last light. The ash trees were nearly bare now, their last leaves drifting down in the still air, and the stone road was buried deep in yellow and brown. The mill race ran cold and clear. The old mill wheel stood motionless in the dark above the race, its timbers silver with age. Corwin walked the road the way he always walked it, methodically, lantern at his hip, listening to the night. An owl somewhere in the ash trees. The river running steady over the stones at the bridge. The ridge dark against the stars, and the hills beyond the ridge dark against the darker sky, and somewhere up there in the mountain passes, a wandering matriarch making her way home. He thought about the treaty stone in the clearing at the north end of the valley, and the words in 2 languages still legible after 40 years, and the number of people who had passed it without reading it. He thought about how a thing can stand in plain sight for a generation, and become invisible through no malice at all, just the slow drift of not paying attention, of assuming the old agreements were settled and required no tending. The treaty stone had not moved. The agreement it recorded had not changed. Clan Asheville had sent their wandering matriarch down the hill roads every 20 years to say the words, the way you tend a fire to keep it from going out, not because you doubt the fire's existence, but because fire needs tending. He thought about how quietly enormous a thing that was. He thought about how much can be forgotten when no one pays attention, and how quickly it comes back when one person does. He walked the road to the bridge and turned at the bridge and walked it back. In the gate yard, the cooking fire had burned down to coals. The market square was empty and clean. Asheville was asleep. In the morning, he knew, Gort would tell the story at the tavern, and the story would be different from the ghost story, less thrilling in some ways and more honest in others. The tanner and the orc man would likely send a letter about the hides. The mill wife would probably order cloth. By winter, there would be at least 3 people in Asheville who had read the treaty stone's human face all the way through and remembered what it said. That was not a great restoration. It was 3 people instead of none, and 3 was how these things begin, quietly in the gate yard, over a cooking fire, with a leather ball rolling between a gap-toothed orc girl and a boy who had never met an orc before that morning, and who would remember this particular Tuesday for the rest of his life. In 20 years or less, if Dara Stonebraid was right about the treaty holding, someone from Clan Asheville would come down the north track again with the rust and gold colors, and the silver braid clasps and the patient, measuring eyes, and there would be someone at the gate to meet them. He touched the piece of embroidery in his coat pocket. A friend of the clan carries it. He walked back to the gatehouse, stirred the coals, put wood on the fire. He sat on the stool and looked at the cloth on the wall, the tree and the stone in the clan colors, and the gatehouse that had been for 3 days a place of shelter felt different now. Not smaller, larger, inhabited by something it had not held before. He poured a last cup of the mountain ale. He said to nobody in particular, to the fire and the cloth and the night road outside, "Come back." The fire burned on. The mill road lay quiet in the dark, and at the north end of the valley the treaty stone stood in its clearing under the stars, reading well, holding good, waiting patiently for the next person who would stop and look at what had always been there.